it's time to go dark a little bit now. We got to go to the negative side. And so with every draft, there's players that you love and you think can outperform their ADP. But Eric, there's also players you're like, they're not going to live up to expectations. Talk to me. Who's the first one on your list?
All right, first one's going to be Josh Jacobs. I have to do it. I get so much grief about talking about Josh Jacobs on Twitter sometimes. But they're like, but Moody, he showcased his talent last year. He led the Raiders with 393 touches and had 19.3 fantasy points per game. He outperformed his ADP position. He did. I get that. However, heading into the 2023 season, his circumstances have changed. He's got an injury-prone Jimmy G at quarterback. Darren Waller, he's with the Giants. They've got an unimproved offensive line and one of the league's weakest defenses. So I see a scenario where teams like, okay, we know what Josh Jacobs is capable of. I think he's going to encounter frequent stacked boxes, and he's going to be exposed to negative game flow scenarios, ultimately limiting his fantasy potential. And now we've got this contract stuff going on. The running backs are upset. We had a Zoom call. We're not getting paid. I understand that. But Jacobs has taken the attitude, and just reading some of his recent, tweets or reports, is that it doesn't sound like he's going to walk through the door anytime soon. And I'm really concerned for anyone that plays running back, given the physicality of the position, to miss practice time, to miss reps. When you factor all that in Jacobs' ADP, I am staying away.
Man, yeah, I got him at the back end of the running back one conversation, and I might be putting that down a little bit more here as the offseason goes. And it's tough because he's a player that obviously played for a contract last season. It was well documented. And if he's on the franchise tag, we know we're probably going to get that same energy and passion. But this is also a guy who the year before said, I don't care about your fantasy team. And so why would you want a guy on your team that doesn't care about your fantasy team, right? No. Josh Jacobs, to me, he has the potential, right? We saw the potential, but that also could be the ceiling. And so I think he's also a guy for me I'm probably out on unless he somehow slipped to me and he was my RB2 in the fourth, fifth round. I'm not actively pursuing Josh Jacobs. I love that Twitter voice, by the way. How's the Twitter voice? Yeah.
You like that? All right.
The Twitter.
You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
The Twitter streets.
The Twitter,
the Twitter. You know what it is.
All right. Another big name. I'm going to go big name. I'm going to see your big name, and I'm actually going to go a little bit bigger.
Ooh, let's do it.
And I think you referenced this player a little bit earlier in our conversation, Austin Eckler. Austin Eckler is a guy that I am fading. Right now, he's a top 3 pick. Yeah. Overall in ADP, number 2 running back going off the board right after Christian McCaffrey. Some have him as the number 1 running back. But you know what? This is a guy that has had a much improved situation due to injuries on this Chargers team, especially last season when we talk about Keenan Allen and Mike Williams missing a significant amount of games.
Oh, yeah.
Justin Herbert was also hurt, dealing with cracked ribs. So they had to feed Austin Eckler a lot more than they typically would have, even in the year past, right? They were dealing with injuries on that team. And now you bring in an offensive coordinator who's going to open things up a lot more. You bring in a first-round pick who's here to help push the offense downfield in Quentin Johnston. Kellen Moore, Quentin Johnston now, that kind of spells doom to me for Austin Eckler, a guy that's probably going to be in a backfield by committee. We saw that with Dallas. They want to get the most out of their lightning and thunder. So I don't think we're going to see Austin Eckler being used as much in the red zone. I think we'll see a lot more of either Joshua Kelly, Isaiah Spiller, some combination of the three. Mm-hmm. But to me, this is a situation where we're not getting 17 to 20 touchdown Austin Eckler, probably reduced workload to keep him fresh to help for the playoff push. To me, I'm out at Eckler at his ADP. If he was running back 4, 5, 6, now we're talking. I think it's a little too early for him at RB2.
Yeah, no, that's something I can buy into because I just think about like when you're in a draft and where he's going. Like I would just much rather have if he drops like say Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase. Like I think in the way that drafts are going in ADP, it's like it's better to prioritize like wide receivers early, whether it's in the first round or first and second round, because there are a ton of viable running backs like in rounds 3, 4, 5, and 6. I think there's a number of guys who could like surpass expectations. And so again, it's kind of that scenario about people, they're driving the car, my man. They're driving the car, they're looking in the rearview mirror and not looking ahead. Everyone can't be Ace Ventura.
Yeah.
So I would say everyone can't be Ace Ventura. So I'm with you there. I'm sitting there like, I'm buying it, Justin. I'm buying it, my man. I'm buying it. Okay.
It's what it is real. It's real, man. It's easy to, I think a lot of you talk about receiver value. It's just a more stable floor. We also haven't seen Austin Eckler really deal with any injuries. And I hate to say it, but it's one of the most injury prone positions. So when you look over the course of time, somebody that's been healthy year after year, it's like at some point they're going to get banged up just by the nature of the position. I'm not wishing nothing, but and he's older. He's like 27. In running back years, it's like 100. So,
yeah.
All right, next up on your fade list, who you got?
All right, I'm gonna have to do it. I got to talk about Deebo Samuel. I haven't gotten as much Twitter grief about Deebo. So
this one hurts me though, because you know what I'm saying. Well, I guess this is makeup for the Saints and Niners back in 2011, right? I had to bring that up, baby.
Oh, that's painful. That's painful. When I look at Deebo, I just think about if I'm drafting Deebo at his current ADP. It's just really hard for me to justify when considering like his decreased production last season. He averaged 12.9 fantasy points per game compared to 21.2 per game in 2021. So despite like a 25.4% target share, I'm like Samuel's fantasy ceiling, I guess the best way to put it was really hampered by a lack of deep targets. He had a decreased number of rushing attempts, and also the presence of Christian McCaffrey in San Francisco did not help. So with an average of 7.2 targets per game, Deebo falls slightly behind Brandon Ayuk, who averaged 6.7 targets and 13.4 fantasy points per game. Really just making Ayuk, in my opinion, like the more favorable choice in terms of value when considering their ADPs, because their stats obviously changed quite a bit once McCaffrey came on board, since he's so prolific as a receiver out of the backfield. And so my biggest issue with Deebo is not necessarily the player himself, but really his average draft position. And I think you have someone in Ayuk who could have nearly as many targets once the dust settles on the 2023 season as Samuel. So, and he's cheaper. So.
All right, I was going to come out swinging. You start talking about my boy Deebo, but it's like, I can see it because Ayuk does have a lot of value right now, and he's in like wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 land. Deebo's in wide receiver 2 land, and I do think that we are penalizing Deebo a lot draft wise because of what he did earlier. We're expecting he's not the top 3 players, so we have to mark it. He's not the same player that he was. But you got to depend on him right now as a wide receiver 2, and so there are a lot of question marks about the San Francisco offense. I'm not as concerned, but I do like Ayuk's draft position way better than Deebo Samuel, so I'm with you there. All right, this one might throw you for a loop. I don't know if it will. Maybe not. Travis Etienne. This is a guy that, is a top 15 back right now in fantasy drafts. And fantasy managers are saying, you know what? I expect him to run wild in this offense. Trevor Lawrence is taking the development as a passer. They brought in Calvin Ridley. Things should open up. I don't see it that way. I look at the other side of this, and there was a lot of telling signs for me that this Jacksonville team doesn't trust Travis Etienne to have any type of workload that he did last year. And that's the signing of Dearness Johnson. That's the fact they drafted Tank Bigsby in the 3rd round. That's the fact that they re-signed JaMychal Hasty, who came in and played a major role in the second half of last season after he was acquired. And to me, this feels like Travis Etienne wasn't part of this Doug Peterson, this group. This was the old Urban Meyer transaction. Like, this wasn't a piece that Doug Peterson needed to rely on. So his style of football is a lot different than Urban Meyer's. I could see him having a very reduced workload and not living up anywhere near top 15 running backs when you can talk about guys, Tony Pollard, Najee Harris, Joe Mixon, Aaron Jones, guys with really solid workloads that are going around the same ADP. So we saw this team didn't really use him even early in the season when James Robinson was healthy and playing. This team wasn't using him. It took an injury for him to actually take on a full workload. After week 9, I hate to say it, no games over 12 fantasy points for Travis Etienne after week 9. And so when you're drafting that at RB for your RB1 or your RB2, I'm greatly concerned.
Yeah, I'm like, Etienne isn't someone I'm aggressively targeting in drafts. I'm like, if he's there and he's kind of the last player in that tier, I'll draft him. But he's someone I'm not going out of my way to pick up. So very, very valid concerns there.
Push him down the list, baby. Mm-hmm. All right, who you got next for me?
All right, so we're going to talk about Mike Williams. I kind of alluded to this earlier, but I think everyone remembers Mike Williams, his most productive season, back, of his career back in 2021. He led the team with, 1,146 receiving yards, had 9 receiving touchdowns, only missed 1 game due to injury, averaged 15.4 fantasy points per game that year. He was superb. But in 2022, Williams, he missed games, which he has done, really since his rookie season with a lot of lower back issues. He finished with only 895 receiving yards, only 4 touchdowns. So things took a step back, dramatically. And he'll be 29 years old in October. And the Chargers did draft, I mentioned this player earlier, Quentin Johnson out of TCU for a reason. In the first round of the draft, has a very similar physical profile to Williams. And I just think Johnson will end up being more involved than fantasy managers anticipate. And obviously, I alluded to this earlier, like if Williams misses time or if Keenan Allen misses time, Johnston has the potential to be a league winner in this Chargers offense, especially catching passes from Justin Herbert. And one thing about like the target share, like I think Allen will end up leading the team in targets, but the target share, I'm like, let's say if Williams plays, 15 or 16 games like we expect, same thing with Johnston.
Right.
I think the target share between Mike Williams and Quentin Johnston will be eerily similar. So I just prefer to prioritize Johnston later because he's got a much more favorable, we'll say, ADP than someone like Mike Williams.
Yeah, and Mike Williams has historically been a up and down player. When all the receivers are there and the offense is clicking, he's been an up and down wide receiver 3. And a lot of people were putting him in that fifth round ADP last year. Yeah. It got up there, right? But you talked about it. Quentin Johnston's a monster, and hopefully viewers watching right now realize this is truly a weapon for this offense. I talked about him as my favorite receiver in this class, at least for this season. I think this season he has the biggest impact out of any wide receiver, and it sounds like we're on the same page when it comes to that. So I love it. Mike Williams, I think he's a high ceiling, very low floor player, especially if injury happens to him this season. Speaking of injuries, let's go to Arizona, my man, James Conner. James Conner, and you're drafting him as a high-end RB3. And, we talk about price point, but to me, you're looking at a team that's in true rebuild mode. This team has nothing to play for this season outside of Caleb Williams. So when we talk about the Arizona Cardinals, even if Kyler Murray is back early in the season, I think James Conner is a guy that has dealt with injuries in the past and may be involved early on. But as the season goes on and as your fantasy team needs him to win your fantasy playoffs, I'm not sure he's going to be so reliable. This team is probably going to embrace the youth movement at some point, as they did last year towards the end of the year. And this is also a new coaching regime who has players in there that they're looking to get involved. So when I look at James Conner, he's not there. I don't really see the upside there for a top 15, top 20 fantasy finish on the season. I think on a weekly basis, he could do it potentially early in the year. But if you're drafting for the long term, or if your league doesn't actively trade, this is a player I think that would kind of die on your roster. I hate to say it that way, but he's not somebody that I think you're going to be starting in fantasy playoffs. And that's my greatest concern with James Conner and his current ADP.
Yeah, it's like a risk reward scenario because the touches should be there, but you just don't know what the offense is going to look like. And his ADP it seems like it's creeping up.
Yeah.
Which like a month or two ago, I like where he was at. 'Cause he's a guy you could plug in as like an RB2. It was like fourth, fifth, maybe sixth round. Like he's just there. But it seems like now, to your point, we're kind of getting him like at his ceiling, and he has missed games. I think he's missed every season. Maybe like 2 or 3 games somewhere.
At
in
least,
there.
yeah.
The guy is going to be on the sideline when you need him most, and that's suboptimal for your fantasy football team. So
facts, man. We got to have these guys available, and we talk about running backs. I think it's probably easier to call out bust at running back because if they get injured, it's like, okay, I was semi right about it. But I just think when you look at holistically at this Arizona Cardinals team, they're going to be down. They're going to embrace the youth movement at some point. So they got to see what they have on the roster. All right, we got 2 more on the list. Who's next up?
Yeah, I'm going to go with DJ Moore here. And I know a lot of people are excited about DJ Moore and Justin Fields. And so I would say, and I'll be transparent, my biggest concern with Moore really revolves around his ADP. Also have some concerns about the Bears' passing game, like limitations. So I'd be shocked if Justin Fields surpasses 450 pass attempts. I believe he'll pass a lot more than what he did last year, but I don't expect him to all of a sudden become like Patrick Mahomes. And Moore, he's very talented, but really this Chicago offense would need to make significant changes for that to translate into substantial fantasy production for Moore. And so I just feel like fantasy managers are really selecting Moore, I would say more so like at his ceiling. I think that's the best way to put it. And it's just going to be hard for him to really surpass like expectations. When I look at other players that are really available at his ADP, I would just rather target someone else, like 2 players that come to mind or players like Jerry Jeudy or Terry McLaurin. I just think they have a lot more upside than someone like Moore. I think we're drafting him at his ceiling, basically.
You know what? I don't really have a whole lot to add because that's all. I agree 1,000% with everything you said. And it's, I've talked about DJ Moore on this channel before, and it's you're taking a player that you're anticipating being the next A.J. Brown to Jalen Hurts. And this is a completely different situation. It's a different offense. It's a different player. And when you talk about Chicago historically, those quarterbacks don't throw for 3,500 to 4,000 yards. That's not what happens in Chicago with that weather. So the division is a little bit more nitty gritty. It's a little bit more gritty. You also have, other receivers on that team as well that this team is invested in. Darnell Mooney, Chase Claypool, who they traded a second-round pick for last year. They have to get the most out of him. They had a Robert Tonyan. Like, there's other players and playmakers on this team. Outside of that, when you're talking a 300 to maybe 3,300-yard type ceiling for Justin Fields as a passer, there's just not a lot of room to go around. So I'm with you on DJ Moore. Same division, different team, Minnesota Vikings. TJ Hawkinson at tight end. So he's top three. He's top three for a lot of people, man. And I look at TJ Hawkinson. He had two big games last year, two 40-point games that elevated his draft stock.
Yeah.
And I know right now it's easy to look at who's the next Travis Kelce. That's what everybody wants to know. But historically, tight end has been a position that people draft in the third, fourth, fifth round at the earliest. And now we're pushing guys into the second, third round because we're all anticipating there being another 1,300-yard receiver at tight end, Travis Kelce. That's not the scenario. Look, TJ Hawkinson's a great football player, but is he going to be a consistent 80 to 100-yard catcher every single game for this team with Justin Jefferson and newly added Jordan Addison there in the first round? I don't see it. I think TJ Hawkinson is being way overvalued. He's better suited as like the 6th round, 5th round pick than a 2nd, 3rd round pick. He's going kind of crazy right now in some of these 12, 14-man leagues.
Oh, yeah. I could see it.
All right, my man. Last one. Who you got for me?
All right, so we're going to close this out, at least with my my bust, like with the bang. And this is going to surprise people. I could just see their face change as I say this. But A.J. Brown. And the mention of the word bust and A.J. Brown are enough to trigger anyone watching or listening right now. But hear me out. Let me elaborate. So, Brown was impressive last season. Like, he finished as the wide receiver 8 in fantasy. He had a 29% target share. The only receiver who had a higher yards per route run than Brown was Tyreek Hill. Now, I know he dealt with like a hip injury towards the end of last season, gave fantasy managers a little bit of a headache. He's got great rapport with Jalen Hurts. But the presence of Devontae Smith really complicates things. Smith had a 27% target share and finished 14th in yards per route run. Averaged a very good 15 fantasy points per game. And so if you look at this year, I have like Brown and Smith projected for an eerily similar number of targets. And so you just have to ask yourself this question. It's like, would you rather prioritize Smith later in fantasy football drafts? I think his ADP may be anywhere, depending on the league. What on average? What about 2 rounds? We'll say, like 2 rounds.
I'd say like back second, early third.
Yeah, so somewhere in there. And so you know what you're going to have to give up ADP wise and draft capital wise to land A.J. Brown. But why not just wait like a round or 2 later to get someone like Devontae Smith, who's going to be actively involved in the offense as well? So again, I'm going to bring all this together and close the loop. So let me repeat myself. I am not saying to not draft A.J. Brown. So I want to be clear about that. But just think about how you're constructing your team if you want to tie up that draft capital with Brown for where it could be a scenario where you can prioritize a running back. And if you still love Jalen Hurts in the Eagles passing game, you can wait a little bit later and get Devontae Smith, because at the end of the day, both are going to be actively involved. It's a 1A, 1B situation. So, Justin, I'm done.
Yo, you had to preface it because in today's short form era, they're like,
right?
Do not draft A.J. Brown. Is going to be the clip that comes.
You can see it now. Like, Moody said, don't draft A.J. Brown. I repeat, that is not what I'm saying. Listen to the explanation. So go ahead, man. Go ahead.
Hey, I'm gonna bring it down a notch, right? I love A.J. Brown, but you make good points. Like, it is a 1A, 1B. It's kind of like we talked about with Debo and Brandon Ayuk. You can find better value on the same team later. So I don't love it. I don't really have A.J. Brown on a whole lot of teams, and I've done some best ball drafts, and I'm not really here to fight you on that one. So I'm gonna tone it down a little bit. I'm gonna come. You saved the best for last. I went with the easy pickings for the last one. Let's go to Miami. Devin A-Chain is being drafted as the running back 1 for Miami over Jeff Wilson, over Raheem Mostert. I know he's the rookie. He's the rookie, right? He's the guy. Everybody. He's
shiny
the speedster,
shiny toy,
the new shiny toy. But when you look at this team, they have 2 veterans in place for a reason, and this team is headed for like playoffs, Super Bowl run. They're not here to like develop their rookies. Devin Achane is 5'9", 187 pounds. I don't care how you spin it. That's not a feature back and not a guy that you should be investing as your running back 3, your running back 4. Does he have some upside? Absolutely. But Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson are going undrafted right now in most drafts. In most 10-team, 12-team leagues, Jeff Wilson and Raheem Mostert are afterthoughts. This is a guy that, yes, he has worlds of potential, and maybe as a rookie he develops and earns playing time later in the season or next year. But I'm out on Devin Achane. I'm out on the smaller frame. I think he's going to be more of a gadget player at this point. Come in, specialty plays, probably punt returns, kick returns. Use your elusiveness and your speed in other areas outside of handling the main workload. We saw it was a backfield by committee last year with Jeff Wilson and Raheem Mostert. Probably going to be the same again this year.
Yeah, it's kind of one of the scenarios for where I think it comes down to what the fantasy manager's like intentions are. Now, if they're drafting, Achane for where saying, hey, this is a guy that I'm going to start. He's going to be in my lineup as a flex. That's the wrong mentality. It's like it's kind of like a slow cooker. It's like a crock pot, right? It's like it's a guy where you're hoping that during the latter part of the season, if Mostert goes down or Wilson goes down, like he's someone that can be a league winner for you. So again, it's all about expectations. But I get it, and it's a shame that Mostert and Wilson are being overlooked. Those are guys that have been very productive in the league,
right.
Yeah.
Like those are solid RB2. When they play, they're like solid RB2 flex options. Like at floor on that team, it feels like we're kind of overlooking, like you mentioned, just going for the shiny new toy. So those are some sleepers. Those are some busts. My man Eric Moody came by and dropped some gems today. My man, I appreciate the time and thank you for coming on and sharing your knowledge.
No, you're welcome. Yeah, when you reached out about trying to get together, I was like, hey, let's make it happen. So it's always good to catch up. And so I would just encourage everyone, if you like what you heard, if you like the takes, if you like the humor, all those things, follow me on all social media platforms. I'm on Instagram. I'm of course on Twitter. I'm on TikTok at Eric N. Moody. So if you like the NFL, NBA, WNBA from a fantasy sports and sports betting perspective, and a little bit of, 2000s, 1990s nostalgia, I am your guy. So I do like to interact with everyone. If you ask me a question, it's a high percentage of a chance that I'll respond to it. So I'm looking forward to interacting with everyone. And last but not least, Justin, hey, thanks for the invite. This was fun. I look forward to the next one, my man.
Yes, sir. We'll have to do it again. When things dial down, I know training camp preseason's coming up, so when things dial down a little bit, we'll get back on. So appreciate your time, Eric. And that does it for today's episode. Make sure you guys like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next